Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Odinic School of Mysteries. My name is Bear. Thank you all for coming. So, you probably noticed right off that you're not seeing my luxurious face talking to you in person. As some of you may be aware or may not be aware, we are expanding to do podcasts, and so as a result of that, I need to learn how to do audio editing, which, to be frank, is a lot easier, but I don't have a lot of experience in it. So, same person. You just get to listen to my beautiful voice instead of, you know, looking at my face. Part of me, I really like the camera, just because it feels a little bit more personal. Like I feel like I'm looking at somebody. But there's a lot when you record audio. It's frankly, there's just a lot less moving parts to worry about. So that's kind of what I'm learning how to do. So I'm gonna pour myself some coffee here, and we can get started. You can't see it, but there's a glorious amount of steam coming off my beautiful cup of coffee. So we should go ahead and get started. What is a right? What is a right? And you'd be surprised how many people don't actually know what a right is. I know that sounds... It's one of those things, I think, that we take for granted. If you go up to the average person and you say, "Hello, average person, do you know the difference between right and wrong?" And I would say, most well-adjusted adults would say, "Yeah, I know the difference between right and wrong." And that would be, that wouldn't be terribly unexpected, right? However, if you go up to the same adults and said, "So you know what right and wrong is. Please tell me, what is a right?" And you could just see I've done this on the street. No, I haven't done it on the street. I don't know why I said that. I've asked people this, friends and other people. I say, "So can you define a right for me?" And their faces will just kind of glaze over and just be like, "What you see, a right is it's not really something people thought about. Is it not? It's one of those things that we all think we know, but when it really comes down to having to define it in any quick and reasonable way, we all kind of lose our footing there for a little bit, because most people, I would say, haven't really thought of that. And one of my people I really look up to quite a bit is a man by the name of Mark Passio, and I've mentioned him quite a bit on this channel. He was one of the people who really helped me cut my teeth in the mysteries to begin with. So I hold him at a very high esteem, even if I don't necessarily agree with everything he says. He's a big deal to me. One of the things he had said, I was listening to one of his talks recently, and he was saying that on first dates and when we first meet people, the thing that we ask most often is, "What do you do for a living?" And then maybe who are your people? Who are your friends? Who do you hang out with? How do you know so and so? That kind of thing. However, when we never bother asking the person we're dating, or again, this is what he was saying. We never bother asking the person, "So, Do you know what right and wrong is? Do you know what it means to be a moral person? And that's something, I mean, I when I was first dating my wife, I never did that. But if we took and actually spent some time and really dug into this problem of what is morality, what is something that is right, and what is something that is wrong, and as a society we really spent some time on here, I think we would have a much better world. And of course we would. Whenever you concern yourself with, morality, you breed good behavior. However, I don't think people really want to be moral people. I think the long and short of it is that people want to have power. And whatever it takes to have power is what people will want. It's almost as if everyone wants to be God, but no one wants to be godly. So, let's answer this question right away. Let's not bury the lead. So, what is right? There's a saying, Mark Passio, again, he calls it a natural law. Some people call it universal law. Other people call it karmic law. There's a lot of names for this, but it's a universal law that governs, the universe. There's a matrix, a fundamental band of things that, of energy, I guess you could call it, that kind of keeps everything in check. And everything in the universe has to obey this. There's no way around it. Their karmic law is universal. There's no escaping it. And so it doesn't matter if it doesn't follow man's law. It's outside of our it's outside of our judicial system, right? It governs all things. And the law is fairly simple, right? All evil boils down to theft. That's it. That's the whole of the law. All evil, ultimately, when you get down to brass tacks, is a form of theft. So, and I've said this before on this channel, I could murder you, and I could steal your life. I can lock you in a cage and steal your freedom. I could threaten you and take away your free will. I can hit you in the face. I could assault you and steal the well-being from your body and your sense of safety. I can invade your house and then steal your privacy. I could rape you. And, there's 1,000 things that rape is. I mean, but, among the laundry list of things that you're stealing when you rape somebody, freedom is among those. Consent is among those. The right to having free will over your own body is among those. All evil ultimately boils down to theft. And then you get into like the self-thefts, suicide, gluttony, sloth, these things. When you, they're not just simply bad for the sake of being bad. You're stealing your own well-being when you engage in those kinds of activities. So all evil ultimately boils down to theft. When you work it all the way down. And this is what is taught right off the bat in the mystery schools. Well, I don't know, I shouldn't say that because I don't know the way the curriculum works and say the Masons. I don't have that much of an intimate knowledge of Masonic workings. I know some stuff, but I'm not all knowing. Um, unfortunately, I'm working on it. Um, but when but in our mystery school, right off the bat, once someone their consciousness has reached a certain level, we give them a concept rather than a list. And what do I mean by that? When we're children, right? I have kids. A lot of my viewership has kids. Um, when they're babies, really, there's no rules in the household, right? Because the kid can't do anything. But as the child gets older and starts running around and starts getting into stuff, suddenly rules start appearing out of nowhere. Don't run in the house. Don't jump on the furniture. Don't poke things with scissors. All these rules start growing out of nothing. And so there's a list that begins to develop. A list of rules, a list of commandments that are given to those with low consciousness, because children don't have not only do they not have the life experience, but they don't have the mental capacity to reason through problems in a way that would lend itself to figuring some of the stuff out on their own. Like as an adult, I could watch my son climb the bookshelf, and I've used this example before, and I could see, because of experience and a knowledge of physics and weight distribution and forward momentum and all of that, I could tell that something bad is going to happen. My son, who is 3, doesn't have that. He doesn't have that kind of mental forethought. So, as insulting as it is to think about, to the general population, it is thought, and I'm not entirely in disagreement with it, is that the average person can't think through a complex idea. And so it is given to the average person a list of things to do and not to do. And so as a society and as a group of people, we just agree that if you don't do these things, everyone's going to be better off. However, it doesn't take much work or effort to figure out a way around a list of 10 things to do and not to do. Right? But in the mystery school systems, you are expected to have a high consciousness. You're expected to grow and be able to hold complex ideas in your head, and be able to hold multiple complex ideas in your head at once. And so what is given to the mystery schools initiates, once they reach a certain level, is, instead of taking things out of the realm of do's and don'ts, we put things in the realm of a concept. So a sin isn't breaking one of the 10 commandments, for example. A sin is a concept rather than a list. So, like I just said, all sin is theft. And when I say sin, I mean wrongdoing. I don't really mean sin in the same way that a Christian would mean sin. And even actually, when you think about it, that's not even entirely true. Being a person who isn't morally sound, a very low consciousness, animalistic person, isn't going to get to heaven. It's just not going to happen. Right. So I guess, and by get to heaven, so this is one of those things that I really got to be careful to define my terms. Right. I really got to be careful because, like God, like the term God, heaven means too many things. It's too big of an umbrella. So for the sake of our discussion here, we'll say heaven basically means ascending, right? Moving to a higher consciousness, to getting out of the world of darkness and gloom and suffering and into a better world of wisdom, light, and gnosis. That's what we mean by heaven. And if you engage in theft all the time, well, you're never going to get to that point, right? So I guess in that sense, yes, sin is what keeps you burning in hell, quote unquote, for all time. This is so weird not looking into a camera. It's really bizarre. It's a lot more comfortable. I mean, I know I could just sit at my desk like a normal person, but it's just really different. Drinking my coffee. So where was I? So when we're kids, like I was saying, when we're children, we're not trusted to know right from wrong. And so we're given a list of things. But so there's a difference here, and this is a very important one. Just because you obey the law doesn't make you a moral person. And how do I mean by that? The average person, we'll say we'll go out on the street. You could go up to the average person. And, I'm being a little hyperbolic here, and I admit that, but we'll say you go out onto the street and you'll tell a group of people, if you had the opportunity to steal a TV and you would not get caught and it would never get traced back to you, you'd get away completely scot-free, would you do it? And a surprising number of people, if they were being honest, would probably say, yeah, I would totally do that. And we see that all the time when natural disasters happen. Shops are looted. People don't steal more for the fear of reprisal than they do because they actually believe stealing is wrong. Most people, I would say in society, at least in aggregate, don't behave, or I should say most people, they behave morally. Not because they want to be moral and because they have a desire in the heart to be a good person. They behave morally because they're afraid of jail time. They're afraid of the quote unquote spanking that would come from the powers of the government. So it's not enough to, and we see this a lot in the New Age movement and some of these other groups. And I should tell you, and a lot of you probably already know this, I have a real hard time with the New Age movement in general. I think it's at worst, it's mind control. At best, it's people who want the experience of being spiritual, but with none of the personal responsibility. I really have a hard time with the New Age movement. And in the New Age movement, with a lot of these people, we see them fussing over their karma. Like, I don't want to do this, or I don't want to do that because I don't want the karmic backlash. And that's okay. I mean, it's probably better that you didn't do that, but you still you're still a person who would totally do that if there was a get out of jail free card. If you could do it and not have the karmic backlash, you would totally do it. That doesn't make you a moral person if you're that kind of person. You're just as bad as the other person. You just don't have, in my opinion, you just don't have the balls to follow through. And so, and of course, and I got to be careful here too. And this is the thing when we talk about these things, is that there's a lot of layers to them. There's also, and this is why you got to spend a lot of time working on yourself and knowing the different voices and the different consciousnesses that exist in your mind, right? Because just because you have a bad thought doesn't mean you want to do something. So you got to be kind of careful here, because there's a difference between wanting to do something immoral, right, and just having a bad thought. Those are kind of different. There's kind of a difference. So, just kind of bear that in mind. A lot of these problems are going to be solved by you just sitting down and working them out. And that's what I had to do. And that's what all of us have to do. As you grow in your consciousness and you start learning the way things work, a lot of these ideas kind of flesh themselves out, and it becomes easier. So, let's go through some examples. We're going to discuss a few things that are happening in politics. I'm not a political commentator. The idea behind this channel is not to, I'm fairly, as some of you may have guessed, I wouldn't say I'm full-blown anarchist, but I'm pretty close in the way I think about things. I don't really believe in the government system at all. I think it's a bad system. With that said, we are going to touch on a couple things we see in politics, because it makes for really good examples for the things we're about to, for this very thing that we're talking about. And the reason I choose politics in this instance is because everyone's heard of it, right? You'd have to be living under a rock without at least hearing some of it. And so that is my little segue into this particular thing. So I just know that politics are sensitive for people, and at some point, we're just going to have to, I don't know, I guess get over ourselves and think bigger thoughts than just, narratives. So there's this thing that I like to call the theft test. And that's a really good way of judging if something is morally right or not. And what is the theft test? The theft test is you take some problem and you think it through, and you try and decide if what you're about to do is thievery or not, if it's taking something from somebody else. If it is taking from somebody else, regardless of whether or not they had it coming, it's morally wrong. There's just no way around it. That's why Jesus said, turn the other cheek. Just because someone else is behaving poorly doesn't mean you get to behave poorly. And this is called a justification. when a situation presents itself where the activity you want to do is morally bad, it's a theft, but you feel like the person had it coming or there's a good reason why you should steal, that's called a justification. Like a cheapy example for this is we could all say that keying somebody's car is bad. To take a nice car and taking your key and scratching a big old line across it, we could all pretty much say that that's bad and we shouldn't do that. But what happens if the person is a cheating asshole? What then? Does it become okay then? Or is it still theft? Does it become okay just because the person had it coming? Or is it still theft? Regardless of what you do, there's going to be a karmic consequence. There's a consequence for doing the right thing, and there's a consequence for doing the wrong thing. Either way, there's going to be a cause and effect that has resulted from that behavior. Right? So it doesn't matter if the person deserves it or not. You're still engaging in bad behavior. You're still going to have to pay the consequences for that bad behavior, whether in the short term, the long term, or the extreme long term. And by extreme long term, I mean lifetimes from now. Right? It's better to learn your lessons early. So, but that's a pretty easy example. Right? That's a pretty easy example of a theft test. What is a more complicated example? Okay, we'll move on to something a little bit more complex, but not too much. We'll talk about taxation. Is taxation theft? And I know I'm getting into some hot water here. I know it and I understand it. I'm perfectly cognizant of the fact that this is going to piss people off. And sometimes, maybe that's okay. Sometimes it's important to talk about things that are going to upset somebody. And it wasn't terribly fun for me the first time I figured this out myself, because I started off as a pretty conservative, law-abiding guy, I guess you could say. It's weird to see where I am now from where I came from. But taxation, right? Is taxation theft? So the way it is sold to us, the way taxation is sold, is that we all live in a community of people, a nation of people, and we all have to pitch in so that we have nice things. Right? We could have roads and schools and these sorts of things. And healthcare and taxation is a way that we all get to have those nice things. So we all pitch into the community pot, so we all have good things to look forward to. And that's fine. And if that was the long and short of it, that would be good. Right? But what ultimately is what makes taxation theft? What's ultimately the thing that takes it from, hey, you need to pitch in and help. That's fine. Asking that is fine. But what changes it from that into a theft? It changes it into a theft when we start moving from, hey, you need to pitch in and be a community player, to give us your money or else. If you don't pitch in and you don't give us your money, then we're going to lock you in a cage. Then we're going to take the money you've worked for out of your bank account. we're going to force you to pay us even more money in retaliation, then it's no longer free will. You're no longer, as a self-willed, free human being, deciding to pitch in for the greater good. You're not doing that anymore. Now you're being forced to. And when that happens, it switches from pitching in to theft. And I don't need you to agree with me. This isn't a political pitch. This is simply giving real-world examples for how these laws affect us in real life. Okay. Agree with me or don't, it doesn't matter. I don't, doesn't really bother me if you agree with me or not. I'm not trying to sell you anything. Right? I'm just trying to get you to think. And that's all I'm trying to do. So, another thing that happens on a fairly common basis is there's an assumption that if two people are arguing, if one person is wrong, then therefore the other person becomes right. And I know this isn't expressly said, but it is the attitude that people have. That if one side is wrong, then therefore the other side must be right. And if I lose an argument, then therefore I'm in the wrong and the person who won the argument is in the right. And we see this in a lot of different ways. Like we could see that, like using real world examples again. We could use the debate with the border wall. The immigration debate. We see this same thing happen when it comes to gun violence. If you guys remember the baker who wouldn't bake or wouldn't decorate a cake for a gay wedding, that actually happened just down the road from me in Eugene, Oregon. So the thing is, and there another good example was, I don't know if you remember, was it last year or a few years ago? There was a woman, I feel like it was in South Carolina, who wasn't giving out, I feel like it was marriage licenses to gay people. I think that's what it was. I don't remember for sure. It was something to do with that. So the question is, these are all three fairly common examples of things that are in the news all the time. Who is right and who is wrong? How do we tell? Sometimes when we're presented with this kind of information, it becomes fairly clear that it is entirely possible and very common for both sides of the argument to both be acting in an immoral fashion. Both sides of the argument are engaging in a theft of one form or another. Like we could use the gal who wasn't giving out the marriage certificates to the same-sex couples. Right? That's a pretty good one. If we're being honest here, and we're running things through the theft test, I don't care where your political stances are. We're sticking just to the theft test here. All right. It is the person who is giving out the marriage licenses is stealing. She's not doing the job she was assigned to do, and the theft occurs when she's not allowing people to do what they have the right to do, which is to marry. And whether or not homosexuality should be marriage and all that is something else for a different time. We're not going to argue that today. But on the other hand, right, it is the the people who are trying to get married are also engaging in a theft because they're trying to force somebody to act in a way that is against their beliefs. So both people on both sides of the argument are both trying to steal from the other person and calling it good. It's possible for two people on both sides of the argument to both be behaving in a way that isn't moral. And when there's a lot of times when this stuff just kind of gets complicated, isn't it? Where you really have to sit down and it really makes you have to ask pretty tough questions. I had to, speaking for myself, I grew up pretty conservative. I grew up in the mountains of Eastern Oregon. The town I grew up in only had 200 people in it. And, I mean, it was all, Western Oregon is all pretty liberal. You know, Portland is a very liberal city. Basically the coast is all pretty liberal, but as soon as you cross the mountains, then it's all rural and becomes very, very conservative. And that's the place I grew up. You know, I grew up thinking, you know, laws are righteous, because this is the system we set up, and the system we set up is good, and, you know, just trusting in the system and all of that. And it was a really hard deal for me to have to really face the fact that, you know, maybe we're not as good as we think we are. On a personal level and on a national level, maybe we are not as good as we think we are. Maybe we make a lot of justifications for wrongdoing. Right, because it is expedient. So there is, and that's what makes. I don't know how to. What am I trying to say here? How do I put it into words? Just because something is expedient doesn't make it good. Right. And this is one of the biggest differences, I would say, between the satanic ideology and the ideology of truth. And if you want to, I don't like using this phraseology, but people use it, so I guess I'll have to use it. You know, the right and left-hand path. I don't really like using that terminology very well. But in the service of, I like to call it in the service of truth versus the satanic ideology. And what is the satanic ideology? It is a mistake that people make where they assume that Satanism is the worship of an externalized deity known as the devil, as Satan. Satanism, in its true form, has no name, and it is one of the most ancient religions on earth. Satanism was rebranded into Satanism back in the 1960s and 70s by Anton LaVey. And he was told to start it. It wasn't his idea. He was commissioned. The reason they use the word Satan is for a number of reasons, but two of the main ones is the goal is to trick people into believing that Satanism is somehow an offshoot of Christianity. That it's just another quaint religion of people who like to piss off the Christians. And we see this a lot when you listen to a lot of Christian programming. The strategy works really well because everyone thinks that all their symbols and stuff are just to piss off Christians. And that's not the way. That's not true. The other reason the Satan is used is because it represents the antagonistic, animalistic. What's the other word? I was adversarial aspect to nature. Basically, it's the aligning yourself with the frost giants, creation out of chaos, that sort of thing. That's where Satanism comes from. And so when you kind of dig your way out of all the what's the word? Theatrics of it, and the psychodrama and all of that. Really, what the ideology of Satanism is ego worship and the law of self is number one. What makes you happy and what glorifies the self is the highest ideal. Self-preservation is the highest ideal in nature. And if it requires you to step on someone else's throat to get there, that is totally appropriate and righteous. You are considered the most important thing. You're God, and you declare yourself to be God, and that is what you want. You do what is right for you and yours, and everyone else can be screwed. That's the satanic worldview. And a lot of people, Mark Passio again, I'm going to reference him here, he calls it mini-me Satanism, where there's a lot of people who aren't affiliated with Satanism, Christians even, who don't even realize that they have a satanic ideology. The me first, self-worship, ego worship. They don't realize that they're engaging in that, and that is actually what Satanism is. So in Satanism, it's all about moral relativism. If it benefits you, it is moral, and if it does not benefit you, it is not moral. And so, naturally, this ideology is a lot easier and way more popular for people. It's way more popular for people. People love Satanism. And because it's all about self-power and self-aggrandizement. It is not easy to walk in the path of truth. It's not easy because very often it's not expedient to do the right thing. It's completely the opposite. What we do is the destruction of the ego, the complete annihilation of the ego. It requires you to be a humble person, to admit you don't know something, to tell the truth even though it's going to cause you a ton of problems. I have recently had to deal with that in my personal life. Telling the truth isn't always easy, and it can make life a lot harder on you. But you do it because you want to be a good person, not because it's easy. And that's the difference. That's the difference between the two ideologies. One is self-aggrandizement, and if you could get away with it, do it. It's all about Satanism is all about how do I get power over another person? How do I get a leg up on somebody else? How do I ensure that I get to have all the power, wealth, and everyone else is a slave to my desires? And which is why, and I've said this before, when you're dealing with dark occultists, because of Hollywood and all of this stuff, we have this idea of like the black robes and the face paint and, sacrificing a cat to Moloch, for example. When you're dealing with true dark occultists, really what you're looking at is a person in a suit and tie. That's more likely to be a dark occultist than a person wearing a robe, if we're being really truthful about it. The moral relativism is the name of the game when it comes to these folks. I am not a moral relativist, as I'm sure you have figured out. I take a very hard-line stance when it comes to morality. And this is one of the biggest things that people misunderstand about anarchism. And again, anarchy, the an, is a Greek word which means not, and archon is a Greek word which means ruler, which is where we get the word monarchy from. One ruler, M-O-N is one, archon is ruler, so a anarch is one ruler. So a monarch is one ruler. So an anarchist is someone who doesn't believe in rulers, no slaves, basically. But people take that to mean, okay, so there's no rulers. That means I get to go burn down someone's house. I get to go hurt somebody else. I get to, because I don't like you, I want to watch the world burn. And so I'm going to steal your stuff and do whatever I want to you because there's no rules, right? Anarchy doesn't mean no rules. It means no rulers. If everyone is a morally adjusted person and who understands theft, there would be absolutely no rules, no reason for laws. One of my favorite people in the world, Manly P. Hall, there was a really excellent talk I was listening to, and he was explaining that if man behaved the way man should behave, we would have no idea that there was a rule. We would have no reason for rules. Would have no idea that there was a law. If man act according to the way things are meant to work, we wouldn't know that there was even law. But because man is who he is, we discover law because we do it wrong. We step out of bounds. We hit the wrong chords and create the wrong tones and create dissonance in the universe. So I'm at about almost 50 minutes. So I'm going to kind of begin to wrap this up. So just kind of in short. So when we're children, right, we're given a list of do's and don'ts because we don't have the consciousness that is required to see bad things that are going to come down the pipe if we engage in that behavior, right? Don't run with scissors. Is running with scissors by itself not an evil thing? No. But you're inviting problems into your life by running with scissors, right? Is climbing on the bookshelf itself an evil act? No. But you're inviting terrible things. You're engaging a behavior that's setting into motion law that will eventually cause the bookshelf to fall on you, right? So when we get older, we have a higher ability to be able to understand right and wrong. And so when we get into the mystery school system, or when you progress far enough, instead of having a list of do's and don'ts, we give you a concept to understand. So instead of here's a list of things, here's a list of 10 commandments, don't break the list. We say, just don't steal. And in that way, it becomes easier. Just don't steal, and you'll be fine. But the problem with that is there's a lot less leeway. Right? There's a lot less leeway. One of the and there's actually and as you grow and as you progress to the mysteries, and we call it climbing the world tree, in the Odinic school of mysteries, or I always say that the mystery school I'm a part of. The mystery school I'm a part of doesn't actually have a name. Most mystery schools don't. I'm just used to saying the Odinic School of Mysteries because of my channel, and so I always end up saying it. But anyway, so in the mystery school I'm a part of, it's called climbing the tree, climbing the world tree. You're progressing from the underworld all the way up to Asgard, the land of the gods. And as you grow and as you climb the tree, your consciousness, by natural progression, because you're using your mind now, your consciousness gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and you could hold higher and higher concepts in your mind. So there's actually a step above the concept of theft. Believe it or not, there's actually a step above that, and that is when you start getting into sound and resonance. When you steal, it creates a dissonant tone. You have 7 chakras in your body. Each one's there's actually more. I think there's actually 12. Actually, depending on which yoga person you talk to, there's hundreds. But for the sake of our explanation, we'll just say that there's 7, and each 7 chakras is located on a gland in your endocrine system. And so it is said that each gland produces a tone, and each person produces a 7-tone harmony, a 7-tone chord. And so everyone produces sound. And we kind of intuitively pick up on this, right? So we could be sitting on the bus, for example, and we're sitting next to someone, and they either are someone that you kind of are attracted to, that you kind of want to, that they resonate really well with you, and you want to like engage with them or whatever, or there's someone who just, even if they're clean cut, well dressed, they creep you out, and you can't explain why. Why is this person creeping you out? Why is it giving you the wibblies? Well, it's because on some level we're picking up on that tone that is being created by that person. And so the greater concept is sound and resonance. So if I steal from someone, it creates a dissonant tone. The wavelengths don't match up like they're supposed to, and it creates conflict. And that conflict is what creates a lot of the negative aspects in our reality. So when really what we're doing, and when we're talking about karma, for example, we're talking about tones, musical tones, and sound, and how they vibrate through creation. And that's a little bit more advanced than we could really get into here. So you can't, so I feel like there's one more thing I wanted to say. I don't remember what it was. So I guess that's it. Thank you all for being here. This is really fun. I'm having, technology is one of these things that kind of both stresses me out and I'm really fascinated by it. Like I really like video editing and audio stuff. I like doing this, but I've never been a very tech savvy person, and so a lot of this learning the social media side of things has been really stressful. So it's kind of a mixed bag for me, and I really appreciate you folks being willing to stick with me. And as I learn and grow and figure out how to use technology, hopefully the viewing and or listening experience will be more and more enjoyable. Depending on how this goes, I might, I don't know, maybe I'll stick with this format, maybe I won't. Um, but it is looking like I'm going to be able to have all my content up on in a podcast format for people to listen to. Um, uh, Joseph in the comments said he really likes listening to this because he listens to it during work time, and which is really convenient that he said it when he did because we were already planning on setting up a podcast. So it was, I guess it was kind of God's way of saying we're on the right track. So I love you all. Please like, share, and subscribe. The more ways you interact with the video, the more ways that it tells YouTube that this content is good and it should be shared. Even though YouTube hates this kind of content, YouTube doesn't tend to like things that make people think. They like things that make people not think, which is why pimple popping videos are popular, but philosophy isn't. So, all right, you guys, I love you. Thank you very much. And I look forward to talking to you a little bit later. All right. Bye-bye.